Welcome to this Doing Your Dissertation video on synthesis. What is it and what does it look like? In this video, we consider what synthesis is and why it's so important when writing your dissertation, as well as the key features of an effective synthesis. So let's start by thinking briefly about what exactly synthesis is, when and why we need to synthesize sources, and what it has to do with your dissertation. So let's take a look first at one definition of synthesis, which I think aptly summarises what synthesis is and why we do it in our academic writing. Steve Rutherford of Cardiff University explains it as follows. Pause the video to read how he defines it, then continue when you're ready. Now let's look at another definition, which focuses slightly more on the structural features of synthesis. In the Wadsworth Handbook, a great handbook for all aspects of academic writing, Kirshner and Mandel describe it as follows. Pause the video again to read how they define it, then continue when you're ready. So from these descriptions of synthesis, we can say that synthesis is about using more than one source to develop an idea in academic writing, and we do this by combining our own points with quotations, summaries and paraphrases from different sources. We do this to help develop, support and illustrate our points and arguments. So in terms of your dissertation, synthesis will be the main way you develop and present your answer to your research question, particularly in secondary research when you're developing arguments using your review and analysis of the literature. But it would also form the basis of a separate literature review chapter in a more empirical dissertation. So in terms of your dissertation, writing syntheses will demonstrate your selection skills and wide reading in that you'll show that you've drawn on a wide range of appropriate sources in your research and that you can select the most appropriate sources to illustrate and support your points. It also demonstrates analytical and argumentation skills in that the synthesis process is one of analysing sources and using them to help build your argument. And finally, it demonstrates critical thinking skills, in that synthesis requires you to objectively consider where sources agree, disagree or contradict each other, recognise the limitations of other research data or arguments, and present your discussion of other writers' arguments, evidence or reasoning in a balanced and objective way. So now let's look at an example so that we can identify from it the features of effective synthesis. This is a simple example of synthesis which draws from only two sources, but which illustrates the principle of synthesis well. Imagine I was doing a dissertation on how to most effectively teach academic writing to new university students. As part of the answer, I might wish to discuss the role of synthesis in academic writing and how this might be taught most effectively. Then, as part of my discussion of synthesis, I might want to look at different ways of defining synthesis and which definitions might be most useful for students new to academic writing. So I might write something like this, based on the two definitions we looked at earlier in this video. Pause the video now to read this example, then continue when you're ready. The first thing to note about this is that it starts with my own point. There's nothing in the two initial definitions from the literature that mentioned anything about a functional or structural perspective. The second thing to note is that I don't just paraphrase the sources. I pick out the parts which support the point I'm making and clearly communicate that I'm using the sources to illustrate my point by using reporting phrases such as an illustration of the former approach is Rutherford 2019 or like Rutherford, Kirshner and Mandel also highlight. And I've also compared these sources, and I use the language of argument to make this comparison clear, using the language of contrast, although, however, addition, also, and similarity, like Rutherford. So already this is not just a description of two sources, it's a comparison used to illustrate my own main point. However, if this was how I left the paragraph, then as a reader I might be thinking, okay, but so what? What has this got to do with teaching students academic writing, or the more specific focus here on teaching synthesis? So unless I show the reader why I'm telling them this, what it's got to do with the point I'm making here, and also the wider overall question, then it will leave the reader hanging. So in order to make this an effective piece of synthesis, I need to present my conclusion of the point and the reasoning behind it, based on understanding of those readings. So I might write as follows. Pause the video again to read the example, then continue when you're ready. So now I've included my own analysis and interpretation in relation to my own aims, research question and arguments. I've recognised the potential limitations of the definitions in relation to my research question, and I've used the language of evaluation to show how I've come to my conclusion. Again, we can see the language of argumentation, whilst, on the other hand, arguably, thus and therefore, and the language of evaluation, the most useful, is perhaps more useful, and my conclusion clearly relates to my overall research question and explains the relevance of the definitions to my research. So from this, we can see that key features of an effective synthesis are that it's written in the context of making a point, which forms part of your argument and answers some aspect of the research question. You draw on sources in order to illustrate, develop and explain your point, and use the language of analysis and argumentation, of comparison and contrast. An effective synthesis will not simply include lots of long quotations. Most syntheses combine summaries, paraphrases and short quotations, but only insofar as they are relevant to the points being made. And as we've seen, they are used to develop, illustrate and support your points, so an effective synthesis will make it clear exactly how the sources contribute to the argument, using the language of argument, analysis and evaluation. And they will incorporate different sources effectively, using reporting phrases and including citations for all the sources used. An effective synthesis also presents a balanced discussion. Note that I didn't only present one definition or present two that were essentially the same. I used more than one source intentionally and chose examples which illustrated the range of features which define synthesis, so that they could be directly compared. And finally, it should always be clear what the relationship is between the points you're making and the sources you're drawing from. And like any other point, it needs a conclusion. So in summary, synthesis is important for demonstrating understanding and critical thinking skills in your dissertation. It's crucial for the literature review as it enables you to present your analysis of other research and sources. Effective synthesis is driven by your own points and uses a range of sources to develop and support those ideas. And effective synthesis is analytical, evaluative, balanced and objective. Thanks for watching. The next video looks at synthesis as a process, including practical strategies for comparing sources.